When we think about our memory, we have to think about it in terms of a storage system. And if you just have a look at this image, you'll see that the idea is that all information isn't stored in exactly the same way. So here we can see there are lots of different compartments, and that's kind of the way that we're going to approach today's lesson. The idea looking at memory in terms of the way that everything isn't just stored in one big store. And those stores might be quite different and might hold really different types of information. So today we're going to focus on long-term storage. And you can see at the top it says retrieval, which means getting information back from. So today we're going to be looking at the ability to store, consolidate and retrieve information over longer periods of time. Now up till now we've only really focused on short-term memory. So the objectives for this lesson are to explore 3 different types of long-term memory. So for these you should be able to name them, describe them and be able to apply them in a STEM. We will also look at some research to support. So different types of memory. So first of all, we know that the first type of memory is sensory memory. This is the initial contact, and this is a very, very, very limited store which is only capable of retaining information for literally a fraction of a second, and this is where information comes in through the senses. The next is short-term memory, and if it is paid attention to in sensory memory, then it is immediately transferred into short-term memory. And this is something that we're currently aware of thinking about. But remember, in short-term memory, we generally have to rehearse it on a kind of loop to hold it there. So today we're going to focus on long-term memory, LTM. And this is the continual storage of information. It's largely outside of our awareness. But what's very interesting about long-term memory is that we're able to dip into it whenever we need to. And we can bring it into our working memory when we need to use it, and we should be able to access it using a variety of different methods. So today the focus is long-term memory. So the first diagram showed you lots of different stores, and the idea being that if short-term memory is put into several stores, then long-term memory must be the same. So there must be more to long-term memory than there just being one large store. So it's probably more complicated than this, but we're going to view it in terms of 3 separate stores. And the first type of store is your semantic memory. And you've heard of the word semantic already when we've been looking at coding. And this is concerned with meanings. But if you just have a look around the side of the circle, you'll see some of the things here, lots of different types of meaning. So it could be something like a concept like love or hate, or it could be an actual fact like general knowledge, or it could be what something or somebody means to you. So your semantic memory is everything to do with knowledge and meaning. So again, it's very difficult to pinpoint a part of the brain, but this is something that you might be interested in from having studied biopsychology last year and started looking at different parts of the brain. So the part of the brain that's usually active when we're using our semantic memory is the hippocampus, which there's a lot of research to suggest that people who store a lot of information in the hippocampus and they're used to storing information tend to have a larger hippocampus than people who aren't used to having to store information. There is a lot of disagreement about which areas of the brain are involved. There is, for example, and you can see here pinpointed, the frontal lobes and the temporal lobes are also implicated in being involved in our semantic memories. The next type of memory is episodic. And if you think about what an episode is, it's kind of like a period in time. So think about it as different episodes. So if you have a look again around the circle, you'll see that these are all kind of examples of episodes. So for example, your personal memories, it might be your memories of primary school, or your memories of your favourite book, or somewhere you used to go on holiday. So these are usually time and place dated, so you usually have an idea as to when they were, and the very personal, specific, unique memories, and there are a lot of associations there with those as well. So this is something about remembering perhaps what you did on your 5th birthday, or a party that you went to, or what happened last Christmas, or something like that. So that's what the episodic memory is. And in terms of locations, it is quite vague, this. There are two parts of the brain that are implicated in being active when the episodic memory is being used. The prefrontal cortex, and this is the forward part of the frontal lobe. And this is involved a lot in higher levels of thinking. So this is when we use functions thinking about empathy and self-perception. A lot of our decision making happens there also. The temporal lobes involved in hearing, identifying objects, understanding language, and so on. And that's where a lot of memories would be stored, because obviously we need to be able to understand them to be able to replay them. They also play a role in emotions. The final type of memory is procedural. And if you think about what a procedure is, it's a step-by-step guide or way of doing something. And if you look around the circle, you will see that there are procedures or ways, guidelines for doing all of those 5 things. So it says concerned with learning motor skills, but look at the word procedure, the way in which something's done. So your memory for getting dressed. So when you get dressed every morning, you use your procedural memory. Every time you do a driving lesson, you're using your procedural memory riding a bike, because you're following the same procedure. And therefore, when you do something new, that's when you start storing memories in your procedural memory, because you've got to learn a new procedure for doing something. Okay, so again, bit of confusing and contradictory evidence as to where this is located within the brain. And because it's to do with motor function, there are lots of different parts of the brain. But the cerebellum is probably the most important here, because research suggests that this is important in high cognitive processing. And if we just have a look at that part of the brain there, it's involved with timing and coordination. So that would make sense for us to use that part of our memory when we are looking at the procedure for things. Okay, what you need to do now is go to your textbook and ensure that you are able to make notes on and write notes and give the definitions for episodic, semantic and procedural. And one of the key things that you need to be able to do here is to differentiate or say the differences between them using the word whereas. Make sure that you can give an example of each of those different types of memory. So make sure that you can highlight the differences between them. So for example, semantic memory is our memory for meaning. So what love means to us, whereas procedural memory is our memory for the process of doing something, such as riding a bike. So they are different because one is all to do with meaning, the other is completely to do with a process and the step-by-step involving motor skills, completely different part of the memory is used there. So just make sure that you are able to differentiate between them. Using your textbook, using the tutor to your resources, and using your booklet, can you try to identify one study that has investigated the different types of LTM? Now, this research is largely going to be quite unmemorable, but one of the things that you can use here that's quite clever to differentiate between these would be the case study of Clive Waring. Because Clive Wearing has a very limited episodic memory. So he has a memory of episodes up to about 1980 something. He has a semantic memory, and he has a limited procedural memory. So he's able to play the piano, but he's not able to learn new things. So what we can see here is that backs up and shows us evidence that there are different types of stores. So you can use a case study, such as the case of Clive Wearing, which is quite an easy case study to remember for this. Unlikely, but you could be asked a large question. I know it says 12 marks here. Describe and evaluate different types of long-term memory. Just think about if you were going to answer this, you would be talking about the different types, giving examples, and then you would be evaluating the research into this. Excuse me. So, what I'd like you to do now is just check that you fully understand those 3 different types of memory. Think about anything that you're not sure about with those 3 types. It is quite straightforward, this. There shouldn't be anything tricky with this. The most difficult thing here would be accessing the research. Please let me know if you need any further guidance with this, and the next lessons will be on forgetting. Thank you.